Every late shift officer Morgan Tate and Officer Reggie Porter circled the same neglected blocks, hunting for easy collars, harassing the downtrodden for a quota. They pretended was about public safety. The people in tattered coats, the ones pushing. Grocery carts piled high with broken dreams. They were targets, two cops certain the world was theirs to bully. That nobody would ever hold them accountable. Night after night, they made their presence known. Boots on pavement, flashlights in faces, demands for ID, and humiliating searches. They thrived on intimidation. But one cold evening, they crossed paths with the wrong man. A disheveled figure slumped on a bench. A man who seemed powerless, who smelled of stale coffee and days without a shower. They thought they'd found their next easy victim. They smirked as they shoved him face down on the concrete, ignoring his calm protest. After all, who was going to believe some homeless guy over two decorated officers? But they had no clue that under the ragged coat and tired eyes beat the heart of a billionaire CEO. In disguise, a man who'd walked away from corporate throne rooms to test humanity's compassion. A man with resources they couldn't begin to imagine when he rose from that sidewalk. Bruised but unbroken, he promised he would bring them down. No matter the cost, he would rip the badge right off their chests, along with the system that allowed them to thrive. Injustice met the wrong man that night, and soon the entire city would learn the real meaning of power. Before we continue, drop a comment telling me the one trait you value most in a person. And if you haven't yet, subscribe so you don't miss the twists coming next. The downtown district was a place of contrasts. Tall, glimmering buildings overshadowing chipped sidewalks and lampposts that flickered like dying fireflies during the day. It was bustling men in suits, women in pencil skirts, taxis honking deliveries, rushing in and out. But as soon as the sun sank beyond the skyline, that same district showed a different face. The alleyways yawned open like hungry mouths, and the fluorescent glow of storefront signs illuminated people in old coats shuffling around. For scraps, the city changed at night, silhouettes of broken souls searching for hope between empty pizza boxes and half-frozen steps. Officer Morgan Tate liked the nights. There was a hush that made him feel like a king in a deserted kingdom, a place he could enforce his own version of order. Tate was the kind of cop who believed in strength above all else. He didn't just want compliance. He craved submission whenever he spotted someone crossing the street after hours or slouching against a storefront. He saw opportunity. It gave him a sense of absolute power to watch fear bloom in their eyes. On the other side was Officer Reggie Porter, younger, less sure, but hungry to prove himself. He looked up to Tate as if the older cop had parted the Red Sea. The first day they rode together, Tate slammed a transient man against a patrol car for looking suspicious. Porter just stared wide-eyed, not sure how to react, but seeing how the rest of the precinct turned a blind eye, he learned quickly that so long as the reports stayed neat and quiet, nobody asked questions, and the brass would pat them on the back for their initiatives to keep the streets clean. That Tuesday night, they were patrolling the quiet sector of downtown, where the shelters overflowed and the soup kitchens turned off the lights by 7. Tate was at the wheel. Porter stared absently out the window, the heat humming, "Look at that guy." Tate's voice cut through the silence. He gestured to a shape, slumped on a bench near an old bus stop. From a distance, you could see unwashed hair stubble that had turned into a short beard. The man wore a faded winter coat, 2 sizes too big, and battered sneakers with holes in the toes. "It's after midnight. Bus lines are done. That bench is city property. Let's move him along." Porter smirked. "We doing the usual routine?" Tate offered a cruel half-grin. "Hell yeah. Let's see if he's got a reason to be there or if he's just messing up the scenery. They pulled up headlights washing over the deserted sidewalk, the glow reflecting off shattered glass from a vandalized store display. The man on the bench stirred, as if sensing them, but didn't stand or run. Tate and Porter stepped, out hands resting on their belts, an unsubtle show of authority. The night air was sharp enough to sting breath, visible in little puffs. Tate approached first. "Hey, pal, you got anywhere else to be?" The man looked up, watery eyes meeting Tate's gaze. "It's a public bench," he answered politely, his voice subdued but articulate in a way that made Porter tilt his head. "Come on, buddy, that's not how it works. Park's closed city benches aren't your personal living room." The man nodded. Slowly, "I understand. I'll move on soon." And he started to rise, wincing a little as if stiff from the cold. There was something about him that pricked the back of Tate's mind. He didn't have that wild fear that most homeless people displayed. When cops came around, he had a calmness, an air of quiet composure. Tate didn't like it. "I said now, buddy, you don't look like you're in a hurry." He reached out to grab the man's sleeve, yanking him upright, more force than necessary. That was when the man spoke again. "Officer, I'll go. I don't want trouble." Tate sneered. "Too late for that." "Where's your ID?" The man hesitated. "I don't have any on me." Tate pressed closer, bracing an arm across the man's chest, forcing him back against the metal bench. "No ID? You got a name at least?" he demanded. The man nodded. "It's Quentin Rourke." Behind them, Porter shifted, wanting to prove he wasn't just a bystander. "Any last name?" the man offered, a small, ironic smile. "Rourke is my last name, and my first name's Quentin. I've told you everything you asked." He didn't flinch, though his pulse was probably racing. Tate snorted, "Smart guy. Huh, think you can just lurk around here with—" "No, Ed. We got calls about a suspicious figure messing with the bus stop. Do you match that description?" Quentin frowned. "I was just sitting. I promise I didn't break anything." But Tate had already decided Quentin was trouble the older. Cop turned to Porter. "Radio it in. Let's see if he's got warrants. If not, we can still run him in for vagrancy." Quentin's eyes flickered. "Vagrancy? I was just resting my legs." Porter grabbed the radio from his shoulder. "Dispatch. This is Officer Porter requesting background check on a Quentin Rourke. No ID on person, possible vagrancy code 22. A scratch of static answered, "Copy, officer, stand by." Quentin's breath fogged in the cold. He didn't look like he was going to run. He just clutched the tattered strap of his duffel, which from the shape of it probably contained everything he owned. Tate didn't like the man's calm. Something about it felt off. Usually, by now, they'd see stammering pleas or watery apologies, but Quentin almost looked bored. Porter got off the radio. "Nothing's coming up, no warrants, no hits." Tate squinted suspiciously. "Maybe that just means he's giving a fake name, gotta dig deeper." Quentin sighed. "Look, I'll leave no argument. I don't want trouble." His voice remained steady, that only seemed to provoke Tate more. "I asked for your reason to be on this bench. You gave me none." Quentin blinked. "I was resting. I can't afford a motel right now. I'm between—" He never finished that sentence. Tate grabbed his wrist, twisting it behind his back. "All I hear is excuses. You think you can just do whatever you want in my city?" Quentin tensed, but didn't resist. "Officer, please, I'll comply." Tate pressed him harder into the bench, the metal rail digging into Quentin's ribs. "I bet you've got something hidden in that duffel." Quentin shook his head. "Just clothes and some personal items you can check, but there's no—" Tate already had his knee planted in Quentin's back, ignoring the man's protest as he motioned for Porter to grab the duffel. Porter unzipped it, rifling through spare socks, a worn business magazine, some cheap groceries in a crumpled plastic bag, an old battered laptop stowed near the bottom, used maybe from a pawn shop. Nothing but worthless junk, Porter said. Smirking, "Guy's a typical homeless drifter, likely hopped a bus across states." Tate forced Quentin's hands, behind him, cuffing them with a tight ratchet of steel. "Well, he'll spend the night in lockup, unless he's got a friend with bail money." Quentin let out a pained hiss. "This is unnecessary, officer. I'm not resisting. I haven't done anything illegal. Just nothing," Tate snarled. "Public intox or disturbing the peace is what I'm thinking. Something's not right about you." It was a lie. Of course, they had zero evidence. Quentin was intoxicated, but Tate didn't care. He only cared that Quentin's posture grated on him. That calm tone, those unwavering eyes, Tate wanted to see them fill with fear, but they never did. They hauled Quentin off the bench, the metal cuffs biting into the man's wrists. Porter held the duffel like it was contraband. Tate shoved Quentin toward their cruiser. "Hope you enjoy the city's hospitality for the night. You'll be real comfortable in a cold cell." Quentin stumbled but stayed upright. He didn't mouth off or insult them. He just said, "I'd like to speak to an attorney." Tate threw his head back with a laugh. "An attorney? Yeah, I'm sure you've got one on speed dial. Let's see how that works out for you, pal." They stuffed Quentin into the back seat. Tate slammed the door. A gust of winter wind swept the streets. Overhead, the skies seemed to threaten snow or freezing rain. The bus stop bench remained silent, a testament to the encounter. No witnesses around. No cameras except maybe a battered CCTV that rarely worked. Tate felt a surge of triumph as he turned. The key in the ignition. Yet another troublemaker off the streets. Porter nodded. "Yeah, we'll get a pat on the back for this one too." They both believed they had closed another routine case. But under the dim glow of a dying street lamp, Quentin Rourke stared through the cruiser's rear window, and in that reflective glass, an ember of defiance burned quietly. Little did Tate or Porter realize that the man they dismissed as a random vagrant had a story behind him, a life that stretched far beyond cardboard shelters and soup kitchens, a life filled with boardroom battles, private jets, philanthropic missions, and a secret need to see if the world still had empathy, hidden behind greed, that life was about to collide violently with. Theirs and neither side would ever be the same. The holding cells smelled of antiseptic, a hint of bleach that tried to mask decades of sweat, tears, and hopelessness. Chipped cinder-block walls were lined with old scuff marks from shoes dragged across. The floor, the fluorescent lights hummed overhead, flickering ever so slightly, casting harsh angles on the detainees inside. Occasionally an officer walked by, ignoring the low murmur of conversation, ignoring the occasional rattling of steel bars. Quentin sat on the hard bench, hands folded in his lap. He was still wearing that oversized coat, which made him look more disheveled than ever. But something about his posture, a straight back, a steady gaze revealed more beneath the surface. The other men in the cell gave him space, not because he looked dangerous, but because he radiated a self-possession that few people in that situation had. Through the thick bars, he could see the corridor where officers typed up reports, bantered about the local sports team, drank black coffee from stained mugs. He watched them with calm scrutiny. Occasionally Tate passed by, throwing Quentin a scornful look, as if waiting for him to break or beg for a phone call. Quentin didn't give him the satisfaction, so Tate smirked and disappeared again. Reggie Porter was nowhere to be seen, maybe finishing the paperwork or maybe out on another petty collar. Finally, An older officer with sagging shoulders and kind eyes approached the bars. "You got a name?" he asked. Quentin nodded. "Quentin Rourke. I've told them a few times, but I guess it didn't matter." The officer let out a tired sigh. "Yeah, well, it's in the system now. You want your phone call?" Quentin stood carefully, mindful of the stiff ache in his muscles from that rough takedown. "I do, officer." "Officer Delgado," he said curtly, then motioned for Quentin to follow out of the cell. Quentin complied. Delgado took him to a small booth with a single landline phone. "Make it quick. We're not running a phone bank here." Quentin picked up the receiver. No contacts or wallet or phone. Obviously, Tate and Porter had confiscated those items at the arrest, but Quentin had memorized certain numbers out of habit. The ringtone sounded once, twice, then a clipped professional voice answered, "Granville Law Offices. How may I direct your call?" Quentin took a breath. "Lillian, it's me, Quentin Rourke. I need to speak to Gerald Granville immediately." There was a pause, almost as if the receptionist was verifying that yes, the voice belonged to the man. She recognized a flicker of recognition. "Mr. Rourke, one moment, please." The line beeped muffled chatter somewhere beyond the phone lines. Then another voice came on. "Quentin, is that really you? My God, where have you been?" Gerald Granville was an old friend and lawyer who had handled countless high-stakes deals for Quentin's company. Rourke Innovations, Inc. Quentin closed his eyes in momentary relief hearing that familiar baritone. "I'm in the city jail. Gerald, I was arrested last night." Gerald's shock practically crackled over the phone. "Arrested? For what? Where are you exactly?" Quentin exhaled. "I'll explain everything later. I just need help to get out bail or a formal release. It's a minor charge, but I'm sure they'll try to add more if I stay here too long. Can you handle it quietly?" Gerald didn't hesitate. "Consider it done. I'll come personally. With the necessary documents, you just hang tight. I can be there in under an hour." Quentin nodded. "Thank you, Gerald. I'm counting on you." He hung up, noticing how Delgado regarded him with a curious frown. No doubt the officer wondered how a ragged homeless man was making phone calls to big-shot lawyers, but Quentin said nothing. Delgado escorted him back to the cell with the same bored expression. "Someone coming for you?" he asked as he locked Quentin in again. Quentin nodded. "Yes, sir. I appreciate your help." Delgado pursed his lips. "Just hope you know what you're doing. Word is Tate's already writing you up for resisting arrest, damaging property, the usual stuff to justify the force he used, but if you got a good lawyer, maybe it'll stick to him instead of you." He closed the door with a loud clang. Quentin's lips tightened a fraction. "Thank you for the heads-up, officer." And that was it. Sitting once again on the cold bench, Quentin recalled how he'd ended up there. It had started months ago after a particularly revealing board meeting at Rourke Innovations. The company was at a crossroads, aiming to expand into philanthropic tech solutions. For underprivileged communities, Quentin discovered that while he championed social impact, many of his shareholders only saw profit lines. He felt disillusioned. How could he keep running a business that wanted to put dividends above actual good? In the world, he'd always wanted to know if the foundation of empathy and kindness still existed at a grassroots level. Maybe do a social experiment, see if people truly had each other's backs, or if everyone was out for themselves, so he left the CEO position to an acting president, withdrew from public events quietly, so no one could make a fuss. If the press knew the billionaire CEO was stepping away, they would pounce, but he handled it quietly. Stepping off the radar, he shaved differently, let his hair grow, took minimal clothing, and a battered laptop so he could keep an eye on the bigger picture from afar. He traveled city to city, exploring local shelters, Talking to real people, seeing real struggles, he funded several philanthropic efforts from behind a curtain using aliases to remain anonymous. He believed in the inherent goodness of humanity. But not everyone was good. Not everyone wanted to help a stranger. Quentin had faced scorn, mocking laughter from passers-by who had no idea. The man they called a worthless bum had the financial clout to buy entire blocks of the city, and he had endured it because it made him see the cracks in society's compassion. Then he ran into Tate and Porter officers who took one look at him and saw only a vagrant, an easy mark for their nightly power trip. A metallic clank jarred Quentin from his thoughts. The cell door slid open, and Gerald Granville stepped in, flanked by a uniformed cop who tried to keep a neutral face. Gerald wore a crisp navy suit, his silver hair combed neatly, an air of quiet authority around him. "Quentin, my friend, are you all right?" he asked, striding forward. Ignoring the other men in the cell, Quentin stood. "I'm fine. A bit stiff, but no worse." "For where?" The other detainees in the cell stared with wide eyes at this polished attorney. Addressing Quentin with such warmth, Gerald turned to Officer Delgado, who hovered in the doorway. "I have a release order signed by Judge Whitley. I think. You'll find it's in perfect order. My client will be leaving now." Delgado frowned but took the paperwork, flipping through it. "That was fast. How'd you manage that?" Gerald shot him a pointed look. "When you represent a man of Mr. Rourke's standing, you learn to expedite matters. Am I free to take him, or do we need more signatures?" Delgado glanced at Quentin one more time, then shrugged. "Guess that's it. Come with me. You gotta collect your personal effects." Quentin followed Gerald out of the cell. A swirl of hushed conversation rose behind them from the other detainees, who realized they had just witnessed something unusual. The exit process was surprisingly quick, perhaps because nobody wanted a big fuss or the press showing up. But there was a moment of tension when Tate appeared from around the corner, smirking as if expecting to see Quentin still behind bars. Instead, he found Quentin with Gerald at his side. Tate's eyebrows shot up. "What's this? Letting him walk already? You realize I got charges on him for resisting arrest and—" Gerald interjected, "And I have in my hand a court order overriding those questionable claims. If you want to press charges, Officer Tate, do it through proper channels. But I suspect we'll find your narrative lacking." Tate's mouth opened, then closed. Frustration flashed across his face. He locked eyes with Quentin, and for a second his face seemed to say, "I'll remember this." Quentin simply gave a polite nod. "Thank you for your hospitality, Officer Tate. I'll make sure everyone hears about how well you protect the city." Tate's cheeks reddened beneath the overhead lights. He muttered something inaudible and stormed away. Gerald turned to Quentin. "Are you sure you're all right? You look like you took a few hits. That's enough to file a complaint for police misconduct, maybe more if you'd like to go after them legally." Quentin's gaze slid over the precinct, bustling with uniformed men and women. "I'll think about it, Gerald, for now. Let's just get out of here." They stepped out into the morning light, the crisp air carrying the stale tang of city traffic. Gerald guided Quentin to a sleek black sedan parked at the curb. "I'll have to drive you somewhere. Presumably, you don't have a place to stay." Quentin inhaled deeply, letting the warmth of the sun wash over him. "I was checking out a homeless shelter on 3rd Street, but I have a feeling I'm not welcome in that neighborhood anymore." Gerald shook his head. "The story behind this is bigger than I realized. Let's get you somewhere safe. I don't know exactly what your plan is, but I'd advise you to be cautious. These officers may not let this go quietly." Quentin climbed into the sedan, The plush leather seats, a stark contrast to the hard bench in the holding cell. There's something I need to do. Gerald, something personal. A final test before I decide how best to use my influence. I had hoped the city's forces would at least be fair, but after last night, I can see how deep the rot might go. Gerald turned the key in the ignition, the engine purring. If you're set on continuing this path, I'll stand by you, but know that Officer Tate and his partner might push back. They won't suspect you're the man behind Rourke Innovations, but they'll see an enemy, especially if you threaten their status quo. Quentin exhaled. I won't back down. I can't not. When I've seen how they treat the vulnerable and powerless, I owe it to myself and to the people to set this right. As the car merged into busy traffic, Quentin gazed out the window, the city's skyscrapers glinting in the sunlight, steel and glass monuments to wealth, ironically, many of which he owned or had shares in, and yet nobody knew him as the man behind it all. Ironically, being invisible as a vagrant had shown him truths no board meeting ever could. He was done letting men like Tate bully others. He had the resources, and the will now. All he needed was a plan. Gerald insisted Quentin stay at a luxury apartment he managed under a shell corporation. It's discreet. Nobody will connect you to it. It's safe, I promise, he said as they entered the private elevator. Heading to the penthouse, the silence between them was comfortable. Gerald eventually spoke. I still think you should go after those cops. Officially file a complaint. Get internal affairs involved. I can build a solid case for police misconduct. Quentin stared at the elevator doors, reflecting his disheveled face. If you scratched beneath the grime, you'd see a man once recognized by magazines as a top influencer in tech. This city has a way of burying those complaints. I've seen stats. It's an uphill battle. Gerald placed a reassuring hand on Quentin's shoulder. We can fight it. You have the means. Quentin gave a half smile. I do, but I want to see how far their corruption goes first. I suspect Tate and Porter aren't the only ones I need to expose the whole chain. If I just file a standard complaint, I'll face a wall of silence and cover-ups. I want something that can't be dismissed. A public unveiling of the truth. The elevator dinged, doors sliding open, to reveal a spacious penthouse with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawl of the city. Plush couches sat in tasteful arrangement. A large abstract painting dominated one wall. Quentin stepped inside, feeling an odd sense of displacement. One day, he was in a holding cell. The next, he was in a penthouse. Typically, these extremes never clashed in the same 24-hour period. Gerald lingered at the entrance. My staff set this up for you. It's fully stocked. Do you need anything else? Quentin shook his head. Just my laptop and a secure connection. I have a few calls to make, and a quiet place to think. Gerald nodded. I'll leave you to it, but I'll check in tomorrow to discuss next steps. Also, I can arrange a doctor for any injuries you have. I notice your wrist is bruised from the cuffs. Quentin flexed his wrist, ignoring the dull ache. It'll heal, thanks, Gerald, for everything. With a final handshake, Gerald departed, leaving Quentin alone in the lofty silence of the apartment. He wasted no time rummaging in the bedroom closet where the staff had placed some basic attire, slacks, shirts, even some high-end suits, none of which had been bought for a homeless man, but for the powerful figure he truly was. He took a quick shower, scrubbing away the city grime. Afterward, he stared at himself in the mirror, steam curling around his reflection. There was that same Quentin Rourke, with sharper cheekbones, these days, and a contemplative expression. He sighed, pulling on a simple black t-shirt and jeans, opting to keep it casual for now. Back in the living room, he opened his battered laptop connecting to the penthouse's private Wi-Fi. Once inside his secure servers, he scanned updates on Rourke innovations, stock prices, the philanthropic projects he'd set up, the trust that paid out to various homeless shelters, ironically including one near that bus stop bench. None of them had a clue that the anonymous donor was the man they'd let freeze outside the night before. With each click and scroll, a sense of purpose hardened within him. He typed a quick email to Gerald with instructions, bullet points of an evolving plan: discreetly purchase body cams and hidden cameras, coordinate with private investigators specialized in police corruption cases, begin small trust grants to local community watch organizations to gather ground-level intel he wanted to create. A network of eyes on the street to catch officers Tate and Porter in the act, to reveal their pattern, if indeed they had one. If they were harassing him, they were likely harassing others. The next morning came draped in a pastel sunrise. Quentin sipped coffee, staring at the city below. Horns blaring from jammed intersections. The hustle of 9-to-5ers scurrying into offices. Ironically, some scurried into Rourke Innovations' lobby. He wondered how many times he'd overlooked the small injustices happening at street level, lost in the world of corporate deals. His phone buzzed a new device Gerald had delivered late last night. It displayed a text from a name Quentin recognized. Ella Meadows, a philanthropic liaison who'd helped funnel donations to grassroots groups. Quentin typed back. She replied instantly. Ella had grown up in the same foster system as Quentin, long before he inherited his father's estate, turned it into the empire. It was now she'd never let him forget his roots, or the people he wanted to help. An hour later, Quentin hopped a rideshare. Ironically, he could have taken the penthouse's private driver, but didn't want to draw that sort of attention. Plus, the simpler approach let him stay connected to the everyday pulse of the city, stepping onto the sidewalk outside a modest brick building that read, Pathway Outreach. Quentin felt a sense of familiarity inside. He found Ella in a cramped office, papers stacked high. "Quentin, you look different," she teased. Taking in his short beard and casual attire, he shrugged. "Undercover. You might say you heard about my incident?" Ella leaned forward, hands clasped. "Just bits and pieces. I know some cops pulled you in for something. I guess they didn't realize who you are? Is that part of your experiment? Again, seeing how the other side lives?" Her tone wasn't accusatory. "Just concerned?" Quentin nodded. "That's how it started. I needed to get out of the corporate bubble. But these cops, they were especially aggressive. I think it's bigger than just them. I want to help. But from the inside, I need more info about the precinct, about the complaints folks might have filed but never saw any results from. I'm sure you have your ear to the ground with the communities you serve." Ella frowned. "Yeah, I do. I hear a lot of talk about certain officers who patrol the homeless hotspots. They're rumored to shake people down. I've even heard allegations they plant evidence on folks to meet quotas or keep them in line, but no one can prove it. They're too scared, or they don't have resources, plus many are on parole or have minor warrants, so they avoid contact with the system at all costs." Quentin's expression hardened. "This has to stop. I want to gather stories, statements, anything that can form a pattern. I'll hire investigators if I must, but I need the community to trust me enough to speak out." Ella looked Quentin up and down, her gaze both fond and exasperated. "You always jump in with both feet, but I admire that all right. I'll connect you with a few local activists. I know. We can set up discreet interviews. Maybe I can nudge a couple folks to talk, but you need to be careful if these cops suspect people are organizing. They might push back harder." Quentin squared his shoulders. "That's a risk I'm willing to take. We can't let them keep terrorizing people just because those people lack a voice or money for a lawyer. "I'll help," Ella affirmed, "but you have to promise me if it gets too hot. If these officers come after you again, you'll let me or Gerald handle the legal side. I don't want you rotting in jail or worse." Quentin nodded. "Agreed. I'm planning to keep everything low-key. I don't intend to flaunt my position. That's the point. I want them to keep underestimating me until we have enough evidence to topple them legally. But if I need backup, I'll let Gerald or, before it's too late." After they hashed out a few details about how to approach potential witnesses, Quentin thanked Ella and left outside. The midday sun glared bright over the city. The bustle of pedestrians passing him by, some with empathy in their eyes as they dropped coins to a nearby. "But it looked wrong to me." Elias paused the clip on Tate's face, though it was somewhat blurred, the shape of his body, and uniform was clear. Quentin's gut twisted. "This is exactly the sort of thing I need." "Do you have more instances?" Elias nodded. "1 or 2, let's see." He clicked another timestamp from last week. The footage showed Tate with his partner, presumably Porter, forcing someone to kneel on the sidewalk while they rifled through a backpack. They didn't even arrest the person, they just grabbed stuff from his bag, then tossed it aside and told him to leave. Maybe they were looking for contraband. I don't know, but it seemed like intimidation more than actual policing. Elias's voice shook slightly. Quentin felt a surge of anger, but he kept calm. "This is good for building a pattern. I can't guarantee your safety if Tate finds out you gave me the footage, but I will do everything I can to shield you if you're willing to let me make copies." Elias swallowed. "I'll do it, hopefully. I won't regret it." He inserted a flash drive into the USB port, transferring the videos. The progress bar crawled along. "It's not a huge city, but I hear rumors about Tate's connections in the EAT department. I hope your plan is airtight." Outside the back window, headlights flashed across the alley, making both men tense, but it was just a passing truck. Quentin placed a reassuring hand on Elias's shoulder. "I promise, I'm not doing this alone. I have legal counsel. I've got folks in the community organizing. Once we have enough evidence, we'll go public. You won't be alone in this. I appreciate your courage, Elias." The older man nodded, handing Quentin the flash drive. "That's it? That's all I got for the last couple weeks. Maybe there's more, but it's overwritten now." Quentin accepted it carefully. "This is enough for a start. I'll keep in touch if I need anything else. And if you see Tate messing with people, again, either record it or call me if you have to, but don't endanger yourself." Elias managed a thin smile. "Thanks for doing this. Not many care about folks on this block. We don't make the city any money, you know." Quentin tucked the drive in his pocket. Everyone deserves safety. No matter how much money they have or don't have, the police are meant to protect, not harm. They parted ways, Quentin stepping back into the street. Sunlight had shifted behind thick clouds overhead. A siren wailed in the distance, setting him on edge, but it faded soon enough. All the talk of Tate's aggression made him hyper-aware of every black-and-white cruiser that passed by. He clutched the flash drive in his pocket, like a treasure. Then dialed Gerald. "I need to meet you. Do you have time?" Gerald agreed. They could meet at the penthouse in an hour. That hour Quentin spent ducking into a coffee shop, ordering a simple coffee black. He listened to chatter around him, a couple in line behind discussing how the city had cut funding to certain low-income programs. A barista complaining about rent going up, no mention of police brutality. But that's how it always was, overshadowed by the daily grind, finishing his coffee. Quentin took a rideshare to the penthouse, entering with a sense of cautious triumph. Gerald sat at the dining table, his laptop open. "I made some calls about the precinct. Rumor is Officer Tate's arrest. Numbers are high. brass sees him as effective. I also heard about other complaints, mostly from homeless or unemployed folks, that never went anywhere. We're talking patterns of abuse at this point. If we can link it all together, we might have a case bigger than I initially thought. Quentin placed the flash drive on the table. I have footage from a local store that shows Tate roughing people up, unprovoked. I'd like to share it with you along with other statements. I plan to gather through an activist network. I want an airtight portfolio, so we can't be ignored. Gerald's eyes flickered with excitement. This is exactly what we need. I'll store it securely, cross-check the timeline. I might get a retired detective friend of mine to help connect the dots. I also have an idea, a press release, but we do it after we have enough evidence to expose not just Tate, but any superiors who turned a blind eye. It might create a massive scandal, but that's what we want. Accountability all the way up the chain, if it leads. There, Quentin nodded, that's precisely the plan. But I want to maintain my anonymity as long as possible. If the media gets a whiff that I'm the CEO of Rourke Innovations, it'll become about me, not about the bigger issue. I don't want that overshadowing the actual victims, so I'd prefer to be known simply as a sponsor for justice, or something along those lines. Gerald grimaced. The press does love a billionaire story. I get it, you're right. Let's keep your identity concealed until the last moment. If it even needs to be revealed, I can front the legal charges in the name of a charitable trust. You. Established. Nobody will suspect a thing. In the meantime, do you plan to contact more folks who have run-ins with Tate? Quentin took a seat, pulling off his coat. Yes. I have a meeting tomorrow with an advocacy group that deals with police accountability. I'm hoping to find more eyewitnesses or maybe some ex-cops who left the force because of corruption. It'd be helpful to get an inside perspective. Gerald typed notes into his laptop. Perfect. I'll handle the paperwork. We can file an official request for an internal investigation in a few days. But by then, we'll have enough to make it impossible for them to ignore. If they try to bury it, we'll go public with the press. I'll make sure the papers are solid, so they can't claim our evidence is inadmissible or tampered with. I'll also talk to a couple of city council members who might be sympathetic. Quentin rubbed his temple, a dull ache forming. This is good, but I'm worried about Tate's reaction. If he catches wind that someone's coming for him, he might retaliate. I saw the look in his eyes when I walked out of the station with you. He's not the type to let it go. I'm sure he's already looking for excuses to come after me or anyone who helps me. Gerald nodded, a grim set to his jaw. We'll be careful. I'll arrange some discreet security for you, even though you can handle yourself. I'd rather not risk a confrontation if Tate tries to pull you off the street again or trump up charges. I want a witness or a camera on you at all times. Quentin agreed. Makes sense. The last thing we need is me back in a cell on some fabricated charge. Let's just stay a step ahead. I'll use cash for daily things. Avoid leaving a paper trail. Wear a hood or a hat, so I don't draw attention. We can do this, Gerald. I know we can. That evening, after Gerald left, Quentin sat by the window glancing at the city lights in the distance, the luminous glint of the wealthier districts overshadowing neighborhoods that lay dark and neglected. It wasn't lost on him how the city's guardians had turned into predators. At least some of them, ironically, it mirrored the same dynamic he'd seen in corporate boardrooms, a few powerful figures stepping on everyone else to stay on top. Well, this time they'd messed with the wrong target as the hours ticked by. Quentin reviewed the footage again, seeing Tate's silhouette shoving innocent men around the memory of Tate's knee in Quentin's back. Flared in his mind, he clenched his fists, letting that sense of injustice fuel his resolve. He was done being silent. Soon enough, Tate and Porter would find out exactly who they had arrested and why that was the biggest mistake of their careers. The next week was a calculated flurry of planning. Quentin moved like a specter through the city meeting, with people who had stories to tell about Tate, hearing about nightmarish run-ins, some with bruises to show for it, others with arrests that led nowhere but cost them time and dignity. He recorded statements on a secure device careful to shield people's identities. As they spoke, he even managed to gain a sit-down with a disillusioned ex-cop who described an unwritten code among certain officers. "We protect our own. We pad the reports. If you question it, you get sidelined or forced out." The man's voice trembled as he admitted how seeing innocent people bullied had broken his faith in the badge through Ella Meadows' network. Quentin found 2 more business owners who quietly handed over security footage. They had stored each clip a puzzle piece, forming a disturbing mosaic Tate and Porter harassing the homeless. Their typical routine, one occupant told of being forced to hand over what little cash he had for fear of false charges. "They said they'd book me on possession if I didn't cough up. I had no drugs on me, but they threatened to plant something." The man's eyes shone with tears that turned to anger. "No one believed me before, but if you can stop them, I'm in." Gerald and his retired detective contact spent hours cataloging every incident, cross-referencing times and dates, verifying with official dispatch logs. Holy hell, we've got them. By the throat. If we drop this bomb in front of internal affairs, they can't ignore it, Gerald said one evening, phone pressed to his ear, as Quentin sat across the table scanning yet another piece of footage. "The question is, do we do it publicly first, or do we give the department a chance to do the right thing?" Quentin pursed his lips. "We approach them directly, but we make it clear if they bury it. We'll go to the press. That might force them to act. We don't want them to claim we blindsided them with media hysteria. We want a legitimate internal takedown if possible. If not, we blow it wide open ourselves." But as thorough as they were, Tate was not blind. He'd noticed a shift in the wind. The hush around the precinct, rumors of an impending investigation, whispers that certain business owners were talking to a mysterious figure outside the system whenever Tate passed an alley or walked into a store. He felt suspicious eyes on him. It didn't help that Porter was growing jittery. "Man, I keep hearing about some do-gooder who wants to file big charges. You think it's that homeless guy, the one we busted?" Tate spat on the ground. "No way that clown was broke as a joke. No home address. No I think it's some damn activist group, probably got a lawyer with a bug up their butt. But we can't be too careful. We might need to make an example of someone, let folks know not to cross us." Porter looked uneasy. "Careful, man. The department doesn't want a PR nightmare. Maybe we should lay low, find a safer route. I hear the captain's real edgy about controversies lately. He's telling everyone to watch their steps after that big scandal with an officer last year." Tate's lips curled in a sneer. "The captain can spin it however he wants. I do my job. I get results. If people gotta get roughed up, so be it. We'll be fine. Keep your eyes peeled for that so-called homeless troublemaker. I got a feeling he's not done yet. I want to find him again, figure out if he's behind any of this. I'll get the truth out of him one way or another." So they went on the prowl again, scanning downtown blocks, looking for Quentin. Quentin, however, had changed his appearance, somewhat trimmed. His beard wore a snug beanie and a different coat. He kept his posture less slouched, more upright, moving with purpose. If Tate was searching for the same hunched vagrant on a bench, he'd miss Quentin strolling with a phone pressed to his ear after midnight, once or twice. Though Quentin felt a spike of adrenaline. As a cruiser crept past or slowed near a sidewalk, he quickly ducked into side streets or into a group of late-night travelers, blending in, just another face in the city that never truly slept. Finally, the day came to present the evidence. Gerald, Set up a meeting with internal affairs behind closed doors. They marched in with thick folders, USB drives, thick with testimony statements from the ex-cop, from local business owners, from battered individuals, all cross-referenced with official logs, that placed Tate or Porter at the scene. The internal affairs lieutenant, a stern woman with a hawkish expression named Monroe, listened quietly, flipping through pages as if holding a live grenade. Gerald ended with, "This is more than enough to justify immediate suspension pending investigation. If you do your job, I believe we can spare your department public humiliation. But I must warn you, if you stall, we will go public. Anyway, we have media contacts lined up. They'd love this story." Lieutenant Monroe's jaw tightened. "I have to verify the authenticity of these documents, the footage, but I can see there's a pattern, and if even half of it stands up, we have big trouble on our hands. You said you want them suspended? That might be possible, but these are serious allegations. I can't promise I can bury everything if that's what you're hoping." Quentin cleared his throat. "We don't want it buried. We want accountability, no more. Throwing out complaints from homeless victims, no more ignoring destroyed personal property. This is real damage, real pain inflicted by officers who believe they're untouchable. I want them off the streets now, not next month, not after more stalling or intimidation." Monroe studied Quentin's face. "Who exactly are you, sir? Your name is in these documents as a victim of false arrest, but the rest of your identity is intentionally vague." Quentin didn't flinch. "I'm a private citizen with legal counsel. That's all you need to know. I'm not after money, just justice for me and for others. If you do the right thing, we'll let your department handle it quietly. But if you don't, we're ready to blow this wide open. I assume you understand the ramifications?" Monroe's gaze flicked from Quentin to Gerald. "I do. I'll start the inquiry at once. I'd suggest you keep your heads down the next few days. Tate and Porter have friends in the precinct. I'll need to do this carefully, too. Avoid tipping them off. You'll get a notice when the official action is taken. Keep that evidence close. We may need the original files in court." Gerald gave a curt nod. "Understood. We'll wait, but not for long." They stood and left Monroe. Sifting through the reams of evidence, her expression grim that night, Quentin thought about how far he'd come from that bench, from the grimy coat, from the illusions he had about quiet self-reflection. Ironically, he'd found exactly what he was searching for, an unvarnished look at how easy it was for the system to crush those without power. But he also found something else: hope, in the business owners who risked retaliation to share footage, in the ex-cop who stepped forward, in the people who believed that justice was worth fighting for. Tomorrow, the ball would start rolling. Maybe Tate and Porter would be called in. Maybe they'd be stripped of their badges, or maybe they'd sense the noose tightening and try to run or lash out. Mid-morning the next day, Quentin's phone buzzed. It was Gerald. "Lieutenant Monroe just called me. She launched the internal investigation, but she wants us to stay quiet for a week or two. Apparently, she has to gather statements from other officers. Do you trust her?" Quentin paused. "As much as I can trust a stranger in a tough position. We'll give her the benefit of the doubt. A little time is fine, but we shouldn't let them drag it out. No indefinite delays if I sense any stalling. I'm going public ASAP." Gerald agreed. "I'm with you. I told Monroe that exactly. Also, we should be mindful of Tate's next move. I heard from a contact that Tate's been asking around for. That homeless man's name, he's probably itching to find you. Do you want additional security?" Quentin looked out the penthouse window at the city. "I can handle myself for now. I'll be careful, but maybe keep a protective detail on standby. If Tate comes at me again, I won't hesitate to press charges or put him in his place physically if I have to. But I'd prefer it stays civil." Later that evening, Quentin ventured out to meet Ella at a community forum where local residents shared stories about police harassment. The plan was to show them the progress being made with internal affairs, but as Quentin stepped off the bus near the forum location, he felt a prickling on the back of his neck scanning the street. He spotted a familiar face across the intersection, Reggie Porter leaning against a lamppost in plain clothes, half hidden by shadows. Their eyes locked for a beat. Then Porter pulled out his phone and spoke hurriedly into it. Quentin's stomach dropped. Tate wasn't far. Behind, he was sure the chase was on. Quentin turned calmly, trying not to show panic, weaving into the crowd. But behind him, footsteps quickened a short bark of, "Hey, you stop!" Quentin recognized the voice officer Tate's voice they had found. Him! After all, he couldn't lead them to the forum. He refused to cause a scene that would put innocent people at risk. So he pivoted down a narrower side street, heart-pounding Porter's. Footsteps thundered behind him. "Stop running, or I swear we'll have you on resisting." Tate's voice echoed next. Quicker, faster. Quentin ran, scanning for an exit, or a safe space. Maybe a bigger crowd. But the side street was dim with only a chain-link fence at the far end. "Halt now!" Tate demanded, catching up the ring of keys at his belt, jangling. Quentin had no illusions about their intentions. They didn't come to talk. They came to remove him from the equation by any means necessary. A flicker of adrenaline surged. Quentin wasn't the same unprepared homeless man they tackled weeks ago. This time, he was ready. He spun as Tate lunged. Baton raised, Porter circled left, trying to block any escape route. Tate's eyes gleamed with fury. "So you think you can undermine us? You think you can smear our names with your lies?" Quentin's jaw tightened. "It's not lies. You're done, Tate. Internal Affairs is investigating you. I have proof of all you've done. If you put your hands on me, now, it's only going to make it worse for you." Tate laughed a cruel, hollow sound. "Proof means nothing. If I say you pulled a knife or tried to attack me, who do you think they'll believe I'm still an officer of the law? You're just a worthless bum, with illusions of grandeur. You think I don't? No, you've been meeting people filming me behind my back. I'll end this right now." Porter hovered uncertain, stepping from foot to foot, as if uncertain how far he wanted to go. But Tate advanced, baton gripped in white-knuckled rage. Quentin's heart hammered, but he stood firm. "You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Tate." The older cop snarled, "No, you did the moment you crossed me." And in that instant, Tate swung the baton viciously. Quentin braced for impact, stepping to the side, letting instincts guide him. The city's hush wrapped around them like a stage on which the final showdown was set to begin. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this story so far, remember to share it and subscribe. In the next installment, you'll see how everything unravels for those who thought they held all the power. Stay tuned.